Good evening. I'm Jimmy McGee. I'm the CEO and president of the Impact Movement. On Mondays, we typically have real talk with our community. It's been going on since March 26th, right when the pandemic started. We did it on consecutive Mondays, but now we do twice a month or every other Monday. And next week, we'll meet again as we begin to engage issues of social justice and critical race theory and intersectionality in the gospel. But right now, I'm doing a video today because we lost two significant heroes in the life of Black people and in the life of the United States of America. These two men were very significant as they battled for equality for all people, men, women, and all races. Early in the morning last week, C.T. Vivian, a former lieutenant of Dr. King, went home to be with the Lord from natural causes. I heard the news right when I woke up early in the morning. And before the day had expired, right when I was getting ready to go to bed, the news is circulated that John Robert Lewis has also passed away. He was a congressman for most of my life in Atlanta. I can still remember voting the first time as he was competing against Julian Bond, another significant civil rights icon. And both of them left us on the same day. And for the Impact Movement, these two figures are very significant and very important. And I want to explain to you why. You know, C.T. Vivian, his notoriety came by being with Dr. King, but that's not when he started being engaged. As a young man in Illinois, he helped desegregate the lunch counters in this small town that he grew up in. He was 20 years old when he was desegregating lunch counters. This is 1946. This is 8 years before Brown versus the Board of Education. This is way before Rosa Parks or even Emmett Till's death. Later on, he got married and relocated to Nashville and was going to the American Baptist Seminary. There he was attending school, and he had two other classmates with him, Bernard Lafayette and John Lewis. During that time, it was in segregation in the early 60s. And C.T. Vivian, under the tutelage of James Lawson, who was teaching nonviolence, as learned from Gandhi, along with John Lewis, Bernard Lafayette, Diane Nash, and James Bivell, all of those people and more desegregated the lunch counters of Nashville. As you can see now, this resolve that C.T. Vivian had at a 20-year-old matured to 15 years later to now he's desegregating lunch counters in Nashville. From there, he was introduced to Dr. King. He became a lieutenant of Dr. King in the Selma mission. He was hit in the mouth by Sheriff Jim Clark as he was battling to get Black people to register at the courthouse for the privilege of voting. What you need to realize is that C.T. Vivian did not do this as a passing thing in his life. This was thematic for all of the days of his life. He was engaged and helping making this a more just society. One of the things he always reminded me was that the mission of SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, was to redeem the soul of America. Well, that's what he was a part of, and that's what he was doing. Well, he did that all the days until I met him. Now, before I get back to C.T. Vivian, let me start with John Lewis. And John Lewis was a son of sharecroppers in Alabama. He heard Dr. King on the radio, wrote a letter, and actually Dr. King paid for him to get a bus ticket to come visit him in Montgomery. From that time to when he was with C.T. Vivian in Nashville, he too was a part of desegregating lunch counters. After that, John Lewis became the very first president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, gathering black students from all over the country to be involved in nonviolent demonstrations so that we can bring justice and equity to the whole country. But he was working among young adults, among college students. In many ways, if you can imagine, he was the president of the very first kind of impact movement. When John Lewis died last week, he was the last public speaker at the March on Washington of 1963 when Dr. King gave his famous I Have the Dream speech. Later on, after his stint as a president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the organization still existed, and some other significant people followed him into that role. James Foreman, Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown. He later on began to work with Robert Kennedy, Attorney General and former Senator Robert Kennedy, to get him elected, until he too was assassinated in 1968, and John Lewis was in Los Angeles then. After that, he became a congressperson, a congressman, actually of my district. So I've had the privilege to vote for him every time while he was in office. See, the thing you need to understand about C.T. Vivian and John Lewis, that as college students, they had a resolve that they were not going to defile themselves, nor were they going to be defiled in this country. All very similar to Daniel 1:8, when Daniel, living in an oppressed state, made that same decision with his friends, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. I need you to understand in the impact movement that the impact movement is not a social club for college students. It's not just simply a Bible student preparing people to just grow in their faith so that they can actually graduate from college and live a nice life, being a part of a church and just going on to getting a house and a car and a family. That's not what we're hoping to do. We're actually hoping that we can replicate people like Diane Nash and C.T. Vivian and John Lewis. You see, for them, a resolve for them was a part of their identity and a part of their being. It wasn't just something they did, it was something of who they were. And what we're trying to do in the impact movement, and it's the hardest thing in this world to do, in light of this Christian expression in this country, but not different from them, because both of these men love the Lord dearly. They were able to understand what it meant to have a relationship with God, to know that God was a power that can only be in them to be nonviolent, but also they had made a commitment to God to fulfill his purposes all the days of their lives. I can still remember meeting C.T. Vivian when he was 70 years old. He died when he was 95 last week. His birthday is coming up this month. And I can still remember seeing him at age 70 and saying, wow, this guy, he's been a part of this for so long. Is he not going to relax? Is he not going to retire? Is he going to withdraw? And I can tell you honestly, he never did. Not till the day he died. He was engaged intellectually and spiritually, emotionally, and even physically, as much as his body would allow. I can tell you today who I am as president of the Impact is heavily attributed to at least two, probably three people, I would say, in dealing with the issue of race. One, it would be Tom Skinner. And it was interesting, Tom Skinner's wife was the executive director of the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. And so when I was being trained by Mrs. King and James Orange and all of these people who knew Dr. King and Mrs. King, I was in the room with Mrs. King. Tom Skinner's wife was the executive director, and he too was one of the facilitators in training. His life of faith and coming from up north stimulated me in my identity as a black man who came from Chicago. And then later on, when I was introduced to the notion of the personhood of Malcolm X, I was intrigued too, because he seemed to really unpack to me the psychology of what it felt like to be black in this country, and what it it felt like to fight for dignity and to have a sense of purpose. When I met C.T. Vivian, he, to me, was that perfect blend between Malcolm and Martin. And together, along with Tom Skinner, told me that I could be a black man with dignity and with integrity, and that I can speak truth to power without always being palatable, but also being gracious. Knowing that people wouldn't like what I said, even no matter how I said it. And as I think about the way I watched him and saw him model this behavior, it changed my life forever. So tonight in this video, it's not really a biography of John Lewis or C.T. Vivian. It's really a plea for you to understand what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping in my facilitation with staff, to you students, that we will build a new generation of people like C.T. Vivian, like John Lewis, and for my sisters, like Diane Nash or Ella Baker. These people spent all of their existence, yes, and they had a variety of careers. Marian Wright Edelman became a lawyer from Spelman. She was a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She later was dispatched to Mississippi, and now she is the founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund. You see, she's been dealing with equity with children all of her life. My plea, my hope is that we could do that with the Impact Movement. That students will understand that vocation and their faith and who they are as a person need to come together as one, and that they can live this life forever with a resolve to be faithful, just like Daniel did, just like C.T. Vivian did, just like John Lewis did. I'm hoping you're going to spend some time doing some homework. I'm hoping you're going to spend some time doing some reflection to think through, what does this mean? Isn't it interesting? And I wish I could ask God, and I wish he would tell me, why would he take two of our most significant generals away when we're in another battle of Black Lives Matter? Why would their wisdom, they wouldn't have to be on the front lines, but their wisdom, their inspiration, their experience is needed today and even right now. I can tell you right now, I miss C.T. Vivian, every aspect of him. I can still recall many of my conversations with him, and I will never forget them. He's a mentor. He's not my father. He's a sage. I'm his student. He's a griot, and I am a person who desires to be one myself one day. I'm hoping that you as students can look at these men's lives. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do to do this. You can look up Eyes on the Prize on YouTube. You can go read the 3-volume Pulitzer Prize winning books by Taylor Branch, starting with Parting the Waters, Pillars of Fire, and Canaan's Edge. You can read John Lewis's biography. It's downstairs in my library. And read his life, from becoming a sharecropper to going to school, to becoming the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to speaking at the same podium that Dr. King gave I Have the Dream, to working with Robert Kennedy. I think you need to do this because you need to get inspired with the fortitude and resolve that they had, because this battle is never ending. It's never ceasing. And the reason why I've been involved in this for so long, as a young guy in his 20s, when I met C.T. Vivian and inspired by him, I said, wow, if this dude can do it all of his life, I can go a little bit further. I'm hoping that's the case for you. I want to say good night, and I hope you'll join us next week for our real talk. I think it's going to be a very special edition. I look forward to being with you and having a great conversation. Good night.